Hey everyone, and welcome to the People Planet podcast. I'm your host Bram, and this podcast is about Fauna InFocus, which is a Cambodian environmental education and public awareness nonprofit based in Siem Reap. Their mission is to improve knowledge of and change public attitudes towards wildlife, raise support for conservation, and inspire a new generation of nature lovers and conservation leaders. Today, I'm joined by Daniel RoperJones, aka the Animal Man. He is the founder of Fauna InFocus, and we will be discussing the birth of Fauna InFocus and what his team have set for themselves. To start things out, can you give me an introduction of you and what you have been doing over the past 5 years?
Hi, Bram. Cool. Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to get this podcast started. So, yeah, my name is Dan, and as Bram said, I'm the founder of Fauna InFocus, and this is a project that I started in early 2015, so about 5 years ago now.
Okay, cool.
And essentially, over the last 5 years, we've been testing our concepts as to how we want to run this conservation NGO. So essentially what we want to do is we want to approach this a little bit differently from other conservation organizations. And that is that our focus really is going to be on education and public awareness. And we think that this is important for two reasons. The first is that for most conservation organizations, education and public awareness tends to be kind of an afterthought. So the main job, of course, that is their priority, rightfully so, is protecting landscapes and protecting species. This often comes up against a fundamental problem, which is that a lot of the stakeholders involved in conservation at all levels of society, whether it's the local communities that we're working with, the regional community leaders, or even government officials and you know, powerful individuals, often have a fundamental lack of knowledge about the importance of wildlife and nature and conservation. But more than just a lack of knowledge, it's also a lack of interest, and that leads to this kind of disconnect between people and nature here. And of course, a lot of this stems from the fact that Cambodia has suffered through, you know, generations of civil unrest and civil war. And so now the country is having to play a little bit of catch up to kind of get back to where it was before. And during the Khmer Rouge era and the following conflicts, a lot of forests in Cambodia were lost. A lot of species began to be overhunted. And in the end, the result was a country that has some of the most unique and incredible biodiversity on Earth, but also some of the highest threats to those species on Earth as well. And so our approach seeks to kind of fill that missing niche, that gap in fundamental understanding and appreciation of nature. And so that's what we've been trying to do for the last 5 years. And obviously, we don't want to just jump right in with big projects and big ideas. So we made a plan, a master plan, and we're trying to stick to that master plan. And so essentially it follows this concept of, you know, we have an idea for how we're going to approach this. So we're going to do a small scale test, and then we're going to move to the next thing and we'll test that and move to the next thing and test that. And so that's pretty much what we've been doing over the last 5 years is small scale proof of concept projects to see if this concept, to see how it's received by Cambodia.
Okay, very interesting. So basically, Fauna InFocus is for the moment, as I understood it correctly, in its pilot phase.
Yeah. So you know, I'm not really sure when we can say we've moved out of the pilot phase. I can tell you for sure that from 2015 to 2017, we weren't even a legally registered entity. It was just a pet project, right? This is something that myself and my co-founder, Mr. Chea Samban, were kind of doing part-time on the weekends in our spare moments. And so it wasn't really until October 2017 that we moved in and rented an office and registered as a Cambodian NGO. And then actually our parent NGO, Fauna InFocus International, we then decided to register a bit later. That's a US-backed NGO, 501c3, that was registered in 2018 in June. So even though we've been running this project since 2015, it hasn't become a real project until the last few years. So yeah, I would say we are still in the development, startup, pilot phase. Most of it has to do with the fact that we don't have very much money to run it. So we're doing everything very small scale.
Oh yeah, that's of course a big challenge.
Absolutely.
So what did Fauna and Focus do mainly during 2015 and 2017 when it was getting started, I would say?
So in the last since 2015, we've been essentially piloting our various ideas. So Fauna in Focus has three areas of work to achieve our mission. And so our mission, of course, as you mentioned, is to improve knowledge of and attitudes towards wildlife, nature, natural science, and conservation, and to build up public awareness and public support. And so to achieve that mission, we've set ourselves three different approaches. And these approaches are different than many of the existing approaches to conservation. The three approaches that we've chosen are media, education, and discovery. And so these are the three things that we've been testing for the last 5 years. And so essentially, I'll just briefly explain what I mean by each of these three things. So media, education, and discovery. So media obviously refers not only to film and video, but also to art, to graphic design, to visual installations, print media, infographics, social media and online communications, People Planet podcasts. That is a part of our media approach. Any sort of consumable media, visual media, artistic media to help engage and connect people with science and conservation and get people excited and inspired. That's our kind of core concept behind media. Education is kind of self-explanatory, except our approach to education is really to hit as many target audiences as possible. So essentially, we would like to have an education program for every audience in Cambodia. So whether it's a monk training program, a teacher training curriculum, a ranger training field course, a conservation biology master's level programs, primary school education programs, summer camp, after school programs, all of these just different programs for different audiences to kind of have Cambodia flooded with available environmental education resources and materials and access. This is the number one thing that Cambodians are lacking when it comes to environmental education is access to these programs and these materials. They simply don't exist. So even in the private schools and in universities, there's very little opportunity for students to engage in real hands-on environmental education that kind of promotes those critical thinking skills that are so needed for people to be conservation leaders. And then finally is discovery. And so discovery refers to those kind of first-hand interactions, right? Where you're going out and you're discovering nature or you're rediscovering nature firsthand. And so we kind of have two approaches to nature discovery. The best approach, obviously, is to bring students out into nature. And so when you can bring people into the actual environments where these rare species live, through field expeditions and research trips and filming expeditions, those actual connections are really meaningful and impactful on most people. However, that's not always possible, and it's usually expensive and time-consuming, and it's risky. And so the second best is to bring nature to you. And so that's what we've now done at our Nature Discovery Center, which is essentially an interactive museum where anybody can come to learn about nature, wildlife, and science in a very hands-on and exploration sort of learning environment.
So you've been talking a little bit about the three main pillars, the foundations and the core of Fauna in Focus. But they sound a little bit ambitious.
Yeah.
Are they all feasible? That's my question.
So Fauna in Focus definitely has set ourselves some pretty lofty goals. But because we've designed this master plan to start small and scale our way up, thus far it's been fairly successful in terms of our impact and our audience and our reach. We started in 2015 with a pilot project in media, and so this resulted in a Cambodian nature film. So when we decided to produce a Cambodian nature film, before we began, we kind of looked at the existing films available in Cambodia, and there were a lot of, well, there weren't so many that were in Khmer, kind of for Cambodian audiences, but the ones that did exist were either really low quality, or were, even if they were good quality, but maybe they were a little bit too political to really have widespread reach. And that's the thing, is if you want to educate and inspire people, you can't really make it so negative or so politicized, because you won't reach people. It's not as inspirational. It's not as positive. And so we really wanted to make a film that celebrates nature in Cambodia and gets people excited about conservation and builds that pride in Cambodia's national biodiversity. And so that's why we started with a film project. And it took us 2 years to produce. And once we released it online, within 1 month, we had over 1 million views just in Cambodia alone on our film.
Amazing.
And because, of course, with Facebook and YouTube, you can actually get in and see the statistics of who's watching your video. And we had, more than a 50% watch time on our film in general. And that's an 85-minute film. So that was pretty exciting. The other thing about media is that it offers a way for us to reach, educate, and inspire urban communities. And a lot of conservation organizations often end up working only with, poor countryside communities, so rural agricultural communities, especially in areas that are close to conservation sites or endangered species habitat. And of course, that's, crucial community outreach work that's done. But actually, often those people that you're reaching out in those communities have very, limited choices to change their livelihoods. If you go and you talk to a poacher who's going out and hunting rare wildlife to supply body parts to traditional medicines, and you tell him, hey, don't do this anymore. Well, unless you're coming with an alternative livelihood, with a solution, then there's really no motivation for him to stop doing that. He's trying to, put food on his table for his family. And it's just not really a very realistic or ethical, in my opinion, approach to conservation. To me, what makes much more sense is to look at the demand, right? Supply and demand are linked together. And so where are these demands coming from? Well, they're certainly not really emanating from the local countrysides when it comes to, traditional Chinese medicines and hardwood furniture. These are coming from, large industrial scale land concessions, mining concessions, hydropower stations, fancy restaurants in the cities that offer bushmeat as delicacies, the pet trade market for exotic pets, and export of body parts for use in traditional medicines, not only in Cambodia, but in Vietnam and China as well. And so you have to go to the source of the demand. And obviously, there's millions of people living in cities in Cambodia, and very little effort is made to reach those communities and provide them with some education and awareness on these topics. And so that's what we're trying to do, right, is to reach them and touch their hearts and minds in a way that will get them to change their behavior. And of course, these communities are in a much more realistic position to potentially change their behavior. And that will absolutely have trickle-down effects onto the supply chain of, the different animal products and consumption of natural resources. So that's why we really try to focus our outreach for now on universities, on high schools and public schools, but also private schools and private universities as well. These kids go home and they talk to their parents about, how excited they are to learn about Cambodia's biodiversity. And, I have a suspicion that it will have a positive impact on the long term. And another thing to note is Cambodia is a really young country. So, 65% of the country today is under 30 years old. And a lot of those people are really switched on when it comes to social media. And therefore, why not use these free tools to try to promote nature and wildlife and conservation to the masses? Conservation really is going to continue to fail if it doesn't have widespread support and widespread understanding. And that's what Fauna in Focus is trying to change. So, the conservation projects are doing a great job. They're doing the best they can. They're spending a lot of money, and it's hard. It's an uphill battle for sure to protect forests and ecosystems and species in Cambodia. What we are doing is the other half of it that I think is kind of a fundamental requirement before conservation can have really any hope. Is you have to have the public and the political will for conservation to work, and you cannot have that if 99.9% of the public doesn't know anything about the animals and the species that live here. And so that's why I think Fauna in Focus's media approach is so unique and so important for the future of Cambodia.
Okay, cool.
So after we piloted our concepts for media, we also then started working on our environmental education pilot program. And so our pilot for our education department is called the Cambodian Wildlife Club. And the thing that we've done with this club that is different or special or unique is that it's very interactive and hands-on. And this is something that even in the fanciest private schools in Cambodia, it's physically impossible to develop lessons like this. Me and my team of staff and volunteers might spend up to 6 months on a single lesson, and that's just a 2-hour program. We might spend $1,000 producing customized teacher resources for that 1 2-hour program. And so essentially what these programs are akin to is the kind of programs that, in a Western country you might find available for school trips to a zoo or an aquarium or a museum. When schools bring their students there, they would have the option of signing up for, a special workshop or a special lab. And these tend to be really, fun and engaging wildlife and natural science programs that are unlike what they might get in their regular school programming. And that's basically what we're trying to emulate here with Fauna in Focus Wildlife Club programs. So each lesson includes interactive media presentations, some films and videos to get the kids excited, and then like a lot of hands-on group work and activities, handling and organizing samples gathered from nature, biofacts, model skulls and science tools that they can get their hands on, digital microscopes, cool things like this that they might not have experienced before. This is something that we've found is highly engaging and interactive for students pretty much of any age. When they come in and they see the programs and the materials, it gets them in the excited mindset to learn something new. And then the topics that we cover are fairly basic. Essentially, what we're providing is 10 lessons that introduce the fundamental foundations of biodiversity, ecosystems, wildlife science, and conservation in Cambodia. And so, we don't go that into depth with them, but unfortunately, because the standards for environmental education here are quite low, we've actually found that we can use these programs all the way up to university and young adult level. Because some of the concepts that we're teaching have just never been taught in the school system that some of our students have been through. And so it offers a really unique opportunity for schools to engage their students in kind of a different inquiry-based approach to learning. And that kind of really helps develop these critical thinking skills, these group work and teamwork skills, communication, public speaking. We kind of develop all of these skills throughout the 10 weeks of programming. And of course, when possible, we end each Wildlife Club program with a nature discovery expedition. And so these are basically field trips where we actually take our students who've just been through our program and we bring them out into nature to experience wildlife conservation firsthand alongside different experts from different fields. And this is obviously a really memorable learning experience for all involved. And so finally, we come to nature discovery. And so in addition to offering nature discovery expeditions, Fauna in Focus in 2019 opened the first and only, to this day, Nature Discovery Center in Cambodia. And so the Nature Discovery Center is a interactive learning museum. That's the best way I can describe it. When we were setting this up, actually, a lot of people, when I said, we're going to make a nature center, there was no concept of what that was because there isn't any in Cambodia. there aren't really any nature discovery centers as what we had envisioned, and so it's very difficult to to explain to people what we were going to do. And so one of the ways we got around that is by actually building a little architectural model in 3D that we could walk people through in a VR environment or in a 3D environment on the computer. And we could kind of show them, hey, this is the concept. There's going to be this giant animal hanging from the ceiling over here. There's going to be an animatronic dinosaur in the garden. There's going to be a place where you can dig up the dinosaur bones over here. We'll have our cinema over there. And so being able to show it to people in 3D really helped explain what a nature discovery center was. And so we opened it in 2019 in January. And since then, we've had well over 1,000 Cambodian students come through the center for visits and for workshops and education programs in our Jungle Lab classroom. And so it's a very small center. It's just a house that we've converted temporarily into a pilot, a demonstration nature discovery center. This isn't the final center. This is the proof of concept center. It was done on a shoestring budget. Everything that you can see in the Nature Discovery Center is kind of held together with double-sided tape and hot glue. So it's just barely hanging together, but it's proven to be an awesome learning space for schools, and we've had great feedback from both students and visitors that have come to explore the center. It's also not finished, even though here we are in 2020 during a global health pandemic. And we're still working on improving the center. So we have to make improvements to our garden and the learning activities that students can engage in outdoors in our little mini nature trail. We're working on a new tree nursery and reforestation, forest restoration program at the center. And we started growing some endangered sapling trees just a few months ago. And we have a few more exhibits to develop as well. And so these will be, for example, the aquatic ecosystems exhibit is nearly finished, but this will be almost like a mini aquarium built within the Nature Discovery Center. And so far we've had great feedback. We've had tons of visitors, and it's a place where when students come, their brains go into exploration mode. What's under that rock? What happens if I lift this sign? Ooh, there's a big red button that says push. So that's the idea for the center is, whenever students come, the first thing we say is, don't be afraid to touch things and to lift things and to pull buttons. That's the whole point, is that they're getting their hands on all of the cool biofacts and little activity stations and learning stations throughout the center. One of the things that we're quite proud of is our interactive touchscreen activity stations. And so far we've got 4 different touchscreen activities around the center. And they're all actually developed using Microsoft Office PowerPoint, the regular PowerPoint. And we've just spent a lot of time and energy and effort developing really awesome interactive hyperlinked PowerPoints that kind of transition beautifully between different stations and slides to give you this feeling that you're in this immersive, wildlife science learning application. And so we can bake in videos and activities and challenges, and you can explore anatomy and learn about other conservation projects or learn about Cambodian biodiversity at these different interactive touchscreen stations. And obviously with today's youth, assuming that every screen is a touchscreen, it's natural for them. They come in and they start poking on the buttons and they start navigating around, and it's very intuitive for them because we designed it to be familiar and to work in a similar way that an application might work on your tablet or smartphone. And so this is something that today's youth are quite at ease with, and therefore it works quite well to get them engaged in learning about nature and science at the center.
All right then. So I want to ask you, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up starting this project? Why Cambodia and why Siem Reap?
Good question. So I've been doing environmental conservation since I was about 20 years old. So a long enough time now. I started when I was in university. I studied anthropology, and I had 2 professors. I had a professor of archaeology, and I had a professor of physical anthropology. And both of them had study abroad programs located in Africa. and both of them wanted me to go and join those study abroad programs. And so I had one that was a primate conservation course. So it was a lot of anthropology as it relates to our non-human living primate relatives. And so her name is Professor Patricia Wright, and she's a famous lemur lady. So she's done most of her work on Madagascar, where the lemurs are an endemic primate species. And she wanted me to come and join her study abroad program to learn about field research of primates in Madagascar. On the other hand, I had a wonderful archaeology professor, an experimental archaeology professor named Professor John Shea, who was developing a archaeology field course in Kenya in the Turkana Basin, which is kind of like the cradle of our probably the cradle of where our species first appeared. However, that field course was kind of new, whereas the field course in Madagascar had been running for a few years. And so I figured, well, I'll do one of each. I'll start in Madagascar and I'll see how that goes. And then the next year, in my senior year, I'll do my kind of final course in Kenya doing some archaeology and see which one I like better and, decide what I'm going to do with my life after that. And of course, then I went to Madagascar and that was it. I was sold. I was hooked immediately.
Of course.
Yeah, Madagascar is an absolutely incredible island.
It's paradise for biologists.
It is,
and all nature lovers in the world.
It is really a biodiversity wonderland. So many of the animals there, especially the vertebrates, are endemic to that island, which means they simply don't exist anywhere else on Earth.
Incredible.
So it's really a wonderland of biodiversity. But it was also so the kind of the main point of that course was to teach conservation biology research. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I however you want to look at it, I'd actually already finished that same course at my university. So I'd previously worked on my kind of senior thesis studying maternal gorilla behavior at the Bronx Zoo in New York. And so that had been, months and months of data collection. It was a very long, fairly comprehensive study for an undergrad. And we'd done it with a group of undergrads. So we had amassed a lot of data, and together we did this big, we each had our own little area of work, and we put together this, nice thesis. And as such, I couldn't duplicate those same credits. And so my professor, Pat Wright, said, well, if you're coming and you can't duplicate those credits, why don't you produce a film about conservation research for the local communities that we work with? And I had really no experience making films, but for some reason I said yes. And I bought a camera, and very old-fashioned Sony, but it was high definition, so. And I went over and spent the duration of the course filming, and in the end we produced a film called Nusimensu, which means Green Island in Malagasy, and it was narrated entirely in the local language and distributed to the local communities and the local schools. And it was the first moment at which I realized that when you're going out to rural communities in remote areas to do environmental education or conservation training, video is a really underutilized tool. Because when you show up in a remote village with a 2-meter or a 3-meter screen and a projector, and you put on this big fancy night show, and it's all in the native language with beautiful music and nice editing and nice storytelling, this is very engaging for the communities in a way that most community outreach programs simply don't tap into. And so that was the first moment at which I was like, video, okay, film, people like pretty pictures, So if you want to reach and educate people, it's all about the pretty pictures.
That makes sense.
And so that was kind of my first introduction to film. And that film actually won an award a few years later for conservation merit from the International Wildlife Film Festival.
Fantastic.
And so that was kind of my first introduction to film for conservation.
I hear a lot of similarities with what Fauna InFocus is doing for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing at Fauna InFocus is an amalgamation of ideas and concepts that have been slowly coming together over the past 12 years of my life and experiences in different countries, working for different conservation efforts, and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And I kind of got to the point where I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself and then not make those same mistakes. We'll see if I can stick to that, but who knows.
That must have been quite challenging for you, making that decision.
No, actually.
Or you were like, no, not really?
No, I kind of always knew at some point I wanted to run my own project.
Okay.
I do feel as though there is this gap in terms of conservation's approach to the kind of established old school conservation methods have not fully embraced the technologies of the 21st century. Whereas on the other side, if you look at, illegal logging and wildlife trafficking and poaching, I mean, they are fully committed to modern technology. I mean, they've got, Facebook groups conducting wildlife trafficking. They've got GPS tags and they're sharing Google Map locations and they're flying drones. And yet on the other side, you've got conservation scientists who are a bit, sometimes can be a bit old fashioned. And this is something that I have seen again and again and hopefully would like to change.
Why do you think that there's such a huge gap between modern day conservationists and, this gap for technology, and why are they not tapping into media?
I think in some respects they are improving, especially in the last few years. However, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. And so, for example, there have been some technologies like, for example, SMART, which is a great tool for environmental law enforcement, conservation research, monitoring, protection.
They're catching it.
There's these great new digital tools. One of my favorite examples of this is for example, like I was very excited when drones started to become used more in conservation research. And one of the coolest examples of this that I saw was a research team that was flying a drone with petri dishes over whales. And as the whales came up for breath, the drones would fly in the mist and collect essentially DNA samples from the saliva in the whale's breath. And I thought that was a brilliant example of how to do something that in the past would have been much more intrusive for the animal, collecting tissue samples to get DNA samples from each individual whale, to get markings and photographs of whales. And now you just fly the drone over the whale, you take photographs of the spot pattern and the tail pattern, and simultaneously collect a DNA sample, and it's all done on a $1,000 hobby drone that's got a 4K camera on it. So yes, I think that conservation is starting to embrace technology in a little bit of a better way.
Mm-hmm.
However, a lot of it misses something more fundamental. And I have seen this from my work in Madagascar, from my work in Nigeria, and also from my work here in Cambodia, which is that it doesn't matter how many advanced, GPS camera trapping workshops you send your staff on. If your local law enforcement team doesn't understand the intrinsic values of nature, if they're not passionate about conservation leadership, if they don't have a solid foundation of basic understanding of the connections between living things and our lives and our future, there's very little real world motivation for them to act as real conservation leaders. And this often leads to a disconnect between the kind of NGOs and the implementing bodies who are already passionate conservationists and the folks on the ground who are either doing the frontline work or the local field assistants or the local law enforcement officers, who it's just a job for them and it's not a very well paid job. And so, for me, I've always been an advocate of, the people on the front line should have the highest salaries. But it's not just about, valuing their employment and paying them fair wages. It's also about providing them the motivation to value their work and to feel as though they are doing something important and vital for their own country. And that is a training that Fauna InFocus tries to provide that I think is lacking in a lot of other approaches to capacity development. Where they are maybe failing or not, I don't want to say failing, but not doing as well as they definitely could be, is on the communications and the public outreach side of things. And so I've always had this fundamental belief that characters like David Attenborough and Bill Nye the Science Guy and Jacques Cousteau and Steve Irwin, these characters, these personalities that are available to the masses and have this way of getting you excited and inspired, in a way, they may, I have zero data to back up this claim, but they may have done more for the overall conservation movement than all the conservation organizations put together, simply because they are the people getting the message to the masses. And so I have this underlying feeling that actually public media-based public outreach is this untapped tool for conservation organizations. And I don't see any good reason, given how cheap and easy it is to produce good quality media these days, why conservation organizations shouldn't make it more of a focus of their work. And that's not saying that some don't. For example, one of our partners that we actually have worked with quite recently on some film projects is Conservation International. And a few years ago, they started a media-based education program called Nature is Speaking. Essentially, they get famous actors and actresses from around the world giving voice to nature, to the ocean, to coral reefs, to water, to soil. And they've done it in French, in English, in Dutch, in Spanish, in Cantonese, Mandarin. It's an incredible endeavor, and it's beautifully narrated and written in a way that appeals to the everyday person, right? It's not, some research paper that's only going to be ever read by a couple hundred scientists. This is mass accessible. And that's the kind of media that we need if we want to build a public that is supportive and accepting of conservation, and also to help build new environmental leaders and champions, and to inspire those people to go out and take up conservation as a career.
And that's where Fauna InFocus comes in.
Well, yeah, that's where Fauna InFocus comes in.
So you were talking a little bit about how your NGO is, for the moment, still kind of in its initial phase, and is heading towards, something bigger, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say, what is the direction that you see Fauna InFocus will evolve to? What is this master plan that you're
yes,
referring
of course,
to?
the super top secret master plan. So basically, the master plan that we developed back in 2015, it's not really a timeline, because there's no mile markers or milestones that we have to achieve at certain points. It's just kind of a something to keep us on mission and keep us focused on what we'd like to do and where we'd like to go. And so obviously right now we've just finished the first 5 years. In those first 5 years, we've done a few pilot projects in media. We've developed a pilot environmental education program, and now we've developed the pilot Nature Discovery Center. And so for each of these areas of work, the end goal would be to just expand them and have them be bigger, better, and more accessible to more people. And so starting with media, we'd like to have interactive smartphone apps, augmented reality and virtual reality experiences that we could run at the center or make available online, digital teacher resources, children's storybooks, coloring books, graphic novels, infographics, a YouTube channel with regular postings of science videos and species highlight shorts, and feature-length films every year. Music videos, you name it, podcasts, just like this one. So People Planet Podcast. These are all media channels that offer untapped tools for wildlife conservation. And I think that this is what we basically would like to flood Cambodia with just nonstop wildlife and natural science themed media. So that's kind of the end goal. So, realistically, you're talking 10, 20, or 30 people, developing nature-themed media on a yearly basis, or on a daily basis, actually. And then for our education programs, so right now we've got the Wildlife Club program, which is kind of our primary core curriculum for schools and universities, but we would love to expand this. So right now we have 10 introductory lessons. Well, we want to take that up to 50 lessons. Some still introductory, but maybe others that are better for older students or more advanced students. So, basically just offering, if you can think of a subject in natural science, wildlife science, or conservation biology, we'd love to have, an introduction program, maybe a 1 or 2 hour workshop with some fun activities and games to go along with that. But in addition to just developing new programs, we'd also like to develop specific programs for new target audiences. And that includes ranger training programs to build up capacities for local law enforcement, as well as teacher training and monk training. And these will really help take our conservation messaging and our experience using inquiry and discovery-based learning to do environmental education and expand it onto other community leaders, so that we can hopefully exponentially expand the reach of our programs and our kind of messages. This is something that we've done before, for I've worked on projects like this, teacher training and monk training and ranger training in the past, and we'd love to kind of formalize it and have it be a regular thing with Fauna InFocus. And then, in addition to that, we want to have some more advanced university level workshops, so some conservation biology field courses for local universities to sign up to. And these could be anywhere from just a half-day lecture to a full week or several weeks of kind of field course training exercises that study abroad programs and local universities could sign up to give them some practical real-world experience. And then finally, we have our youth leadership program, which we just piloted this year. And this is basically to kind of pick certain individuals out from our education programs from the different communities that we work with and identify them as real passionate conservation leaders. And then from this, we would provide them with additional training in project management, administration, media, communications, marketing, education, teacher training, material development, graphic design, whatever, you name it, photography, film, and give them those skills so that they can go out into the world and use those skills to try to have a positive impact.
Exciting times.
And then obviously for the Nature Center, the end goal is to build a proper, internationally renowned, world-class nature education and science center. And so this would be, anywhere from a large house with a nice park that we set up for interactive outdoor education, to a full-on museum, that could, host hundreds of visitors at any given moment. So it's scalable, obviously, our plans, but we've actually developed budgets and 3D models and architectural plans already, just demonstrating what we could do at the kind of small, medium, and large scale. And that's just so that when, we eventually run into our angel donor who likes our project and sees the value of our future plans and has a look at our master plan and goes, wow, this is the best master plan I've ever seen. When we meet that person, we want to have our plans and our budgets ready. And so we've got them ready to go. Obviously, there's room for change, but that's the kind of grand vision for Fauna InFocus Cambodia. And of course, if it works, it could be used as a model to do similar projects in other countries around the world that have high biodiversity loss and a lack of education and awareness amongst the public. So this could be a model that is then repeated in other nations that need it.
Wow, that's amazing. And I really cannot wait until that master plan goes into existence.
Yeah, same. That's right.
Something else. So how is your work for the moment? Because we're living in a very, very peculiar period. As in, we're now almost beginning of April 2020, which means that life and work must be very difficult for you now because of the COVID-19 global situation. How are you handling that?
Yeah, good question.
And how is your team
Yeah, sure.
involved with
So I guess before I talk about that, I just want to bring back an important point about the global pandemic. And this is, of course, something that has been said for, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years by conservationists around the world. A lot of these rare viruses, Ebola, HIV, and now COVID-19, these stem from human interactions with wildlife, right? These are diseases and viruses that are transmitted zoonotically between humans and wild animals. especially wild animals that share close ancestry to us, such as primates. Um, as humans continue to expand into natural ecosystems, uh, interactions between wildlife and people will only continue to go up. And conservationists have really been warning about this for decades. And I hope that one good thing that will come out of this tragedy will be that maybe finally people start taking conservation seriously, because at the end of the day, everything comes back to nature, right? Everything is connected to nature. Everything in our life, our economies, transportation, communications, at the end of the day, all of it comes back to a stable ecosystem and a stable economy. And as such, it's really important that people start to take conservation seriously as a fundamental requirement for life on Earth and for human civilization on Earth, actually. For our part at Fauna InFocus, we've closed our center and we've postponed a lot of our school programs and outreach activities. Right now, all of our staff are working from home, so we're actually doing our first People Planet podcast from home. But that's not the plan. In the future, we intend to do this as a video podcast as well inside the Nature Discovery Center. We've got a little set up for it. It's been a challenge for sure. It's definitely new for a lot of our team, especially our Cambodian team. So it's not to say that it's all smooth sailing, but luckily, our NGO is entirely nonprofit, so we weren't really dependent upon tourism. A lot of the economy in Siem Reap is dependent upon tourism, and tourism has essentially collapsed in Siem Reap these days. And we're a bit lucky in that our NGO is not dependent upon tourist donations to stay afloat. That's kind of the state of affairs at the moment, and hopefully it will kind of start to resolve itself sooner rather than later, and we can kind of get back to work, finishing up the center and on to bigger and better things.
It's good to hear that Fauna InFocus is handling this global crisis so well. So maybe it's time for one last question. What was one of your hardest challenges?
I kind of started this NGO backwards. The way you're supposed to start your NGO is you're supposed to go and get a degree in business management or banking, and then go work on Wall Street and make millions and millions of dollars. And then when you get to be about 50 or 60, you start to feel bad about the impact of how you've made your money. And then you decide, boy, I really need to start a charity. That's the proper model. That's the way to do a conservation NGO. Of course, I've done it completely backwards. I've started as an unemployed wildlife conservation volunteer with no money, and then proceeded to start an NGO with no kind of cushion to get it off the ground. The result has been kind of 5 years of challenging financial fundraising issues. We've got some good grants in from time to time. The number of grants and donations that we're getting is on a rise. At least since we started in 2015. So that's a positive sign. But nevertheless, we are still a very, very small NGO. I think our 2018 annual report, which was our first kind of report as a legal entity, I think our expenses and our income were about $50,000 or $55,000 US in that year, which, if you factor in the fact that we were running wildlife club programs, building the first nature discovery center in Cambodia, had 4 staff working full time and a bunch of volunteers working for free or working part time. We've done a ridiculous amount with a very, very small amount of funding. And from time to time, we get people coming in and looking at our center and, imagining that we're this well-funded giant NGO, and they don't even realize that we've done it all for like 10 grand. So that's one thing that we kind of pride ourselves in is when we say we're going to do something, not only are we going to do it to a high standard, but we're also going to do it for pennies. The downside of that, of course, is it means it's never as good as we would like it to be. It's never as polished as we would like to polish it. But luckily, the feedback has only been positive so far. So our education programs, our nature center, our films, they're all done on a shoestring budget, and yet they all end up coming across as high quality and professional, which is because we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into getting them just right. And that's one of the great things about having a dedicated team of staff and volunteers to help out. So, we really have relied on the charity of international volunteers coming from abroad to work with us for, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months at a time, and helping out with various things, whether it's social media or fundraising or graphic design. We've had an amazing team of volunteers throughout the years. And then we've slowly started to expand our Cambodian team on the ground here as well. And of course, the end result is for it to be an entirely Cambodian-run project that can kind of fully sustain itself without any oversight from any foreigners. It's an ongoing challenge. It's a big challenge. I don't know how this virus will impact that. Probably it will impact it in a negative way. But again, we're so small scale that we're probably not at a very big risk at the moment, which is lucky for us, I guess.
Okay, that's great to hear. And I want to thank you for your time and your great explanation about what Fauna InFocus is, what you guys are doing, and I can definitely not wait to see what you guys are doing in the near future.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And I guess in the next one, maybe I'll be doing the interview and we'll be talking about you and your work.
Oh, I don't know if people want to listen about that. But yeah, and I also want to say thanks for everyone listening to our third podcast. And I want to remind everyone that the People Planet podcast will be something that we do from time to time to help promote excitement about wildlife, nature, science, and environmental conservation. So this podcast will feature interviews, discussions, and challenges with the Fauna InFocus staff, the volunteers, and other wildlife conservation experts from partner projects both in Cambodia and hopefully all around the world. All right, thanks again, Dan.
Yep, thank you, Bram. And thanks to everybody listening. Catch you guys in the next one.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye-bye.